presentation today. The Growing Up team is here to share with us some insights from the longitudinal study of children born in 2008-2009. We do want to keep this quite relaxed and conversational style. I know that's very difficult to do, webinar style, but we will do our best because you all have the opportunity to comment, to ask questions. Feel free to pop in a question into the chat. Jackie is online. She will be moderating our chat for today. So we will try and keep an eye out for your questions. We'll do our best to ask them in real time. Otherwise, we may need to just wait until we get through the presentation. And so the purpose of tonight is really to understand what longitudinal studies can tell us about Pacific children growing up in Aotearoa. But it's also a chance to really break down for us what a longitudinal study is, what it involves, what are the benefits of undertaking one, and perhaps what some of the challenges are, what some of the emerging issues are. And tonight's session will be recorded for those who are unable to join us. We want to share it on our channels for them later, but to also inform any actions. We do want this to inform some policies, some key action points afterwards. And you're most welcome to also share with us any ideas that you might have. But before we start, I do want to introduce our panelists. We have with us tonight our research fellows from the Growing Up team. We have with us Dr. Denise Newman, also Dr. Rebecca McKenzie, and we are very lucky to have with us tonight the Pacific Engagement Coordinator for Growing Up, Savili Itamua. Thank you all for giving up your evening to be with us and to share with us your exciting work. So I will just give you a chance to maybe tell us about your role. If you could just please tell us about your role at Growing Up and what a typical week looks like for you. What does a typical week look like? Perhaps what you like most about your role and what you find most challenging. Just for anyone who's thinking of research as a career and who may want to look into joining the team at some point.
All right. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Jacinta. So I feel so privileged to be here and to be sharing some of this data with you. So kia ora koutou, he iriaho no te apori no ngā tipuro hoki. My name is Rebecca McKenzie and I'm one of the research fellows here at Growing Up in New Zealand. My role is to primarily look after the health and wellbeing domain. And so that what that means is kind of when we ask the young people questions, if it's anything related to health and wellbeing, that's kind of what I'm looking after and what I'm thinking about every day. But what a typical week looks like for me, without a doubt, every morning is the same. It starts with a coffee, and then it changes week by week, depending on what stage of the data collection we are in. So it could be at the very beginning when we're starting to think about what is important for our young people in their whānau at the moment, and what can we be asking them to find out about what's important in their lives, what's supporting their well-being, what might be impacting their well-being. And so at the very beginning, I'll be thinking about these questions, talking to people, my colleagues, doing a lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of writing, a lot of deleting and more writing. And then as it goes on, we will be, another week might look like a lot of meetings, a lot of engagement with policy partners, a lot of engagement with community groups, just trying to get a really broad and holistic understanding of our young people and their whānau, especially now at 17, when they're coming into this age of autonomy and just trying to really understand how we can best facilitate to make Aotearoa a better place to grow up. So yeah, a lot of thinking, collaborating, writing, and coffee is what my typical week would look like.
I think that's great. Thinking, collaborating, writing, coffee. And coffee, I think, should be first, but great things. Thank you, Rebecca.
Kia ora, kia rana, kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, no tiamana no kāna o ka tūpuna, no tiamana aho, ko Denise Naiman tōku ingoa. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Denise. I'm also a research fellow at Growing Up in New Zealand. Thank you so much for the invitation for this webinar today. I'm really privileged and grateful to be part of this. As a research fellow, my week in my mahi looks pretty similar to Rebecca's, and ideally also starts with a nice coffee. And yeah, depending a little bit on which stage we are in terms of our data collection and reporting cycle. So I'm particularly in charge of the culture and identity domain. And so with that in mind, looking at planning the right questions to include in our questionnaire for young people in their whānau. And once we get to the later stages of analysis, analyzing the data in the right way that we can maximize our young people's voice. And then obviously at the reporting stage, ensuring we get these outputs together in the right way. And similarly, a lot of collaboration, working with our policy partners, our stakeholders, across all of these different stages, but also working with our interdisciplinary team, our data management, our biostats team, but also our cohort team, to really ensure that we capture everything in the best possible way. So that's a typical week for me. Kia ora.
Thank you, Janice. Fantastic. And Savili?
Talofa everyone, malole. I'm Savili. I am the cohort relationship lead for Pacific. My role at Growing Up in New Zealand, I do two things. I look after the Pacific coordinators, which are our interviewers that go out and do the survey and collect all the data with our participants. And then I also do a bit of field work as well, where I get to interact with a lot of our participants out in the field and do a few interviews as well myself. Part of my job also involves translating a few things, a few materials and resources for some of our families out in the field as well, and also just speaking the language where we can as well with our participants. Yeah, that's me.
You get the fun job, Savili.
I do.
Fantastic, thank you. So, if you could just maybe talk to us a little bit about what a longitudinal study is and why it matters. How important is it for, our understanding of our populations, and especially what the impact is for Pasifika as well?
Kia ora, Jacinda. I might start with sharing a little bit about the uniqueness of growing up in New Zealand and how it has been set up. So as a birth cohort study, growing up in New Zealand started in 2009, 2010, recruiting pregnant mums at the time into the study. So really starting at that stage where mums were hapu or pregnant. And then the idea was to follow the life of these young people, all the way throughout childhood, all the way into early adolescence. And what you can see here in the picture is, a little bit of an overview of the time points that we've engaged with these families since the recruitment. So you can see many time points, and also in various different formats. So in the earlier years, a lot of our participant coordinators went into the homes of the families to have interviews with them. We also had telephone interviews, and then later on we transitioned more into the online questionnaire, but still supported by our cohort team. And so what is quite unique, again, is that we're actually having this really rich information starting in those really antenatal times, and not just from one or two single sources, but we're actually capturing the whole whānau experience. So we have the main caregivers, the mums, their partners, and then obviously the older the young people were getting, the more their own voice was centered in the way we asked and engaged with them and conducted our questionnaire. So it was really not just one time point that we were capturing, one snapshot in time, but actually being really able to track the same families, the same young people across time, and really get that rich picture around the things that are impacting their development, their health and well-being from multiple perspectives, and with a rich longitudinal data set.
So you recruited Pacific families, mothers when they were pregnant. Are you able to tell us about the Pacific cohort? Who are they and where do they come from?
Yeah. So at the 15 years, you can see in that graph, we've got a diverse group in our Pacific cohort. So we have 855 ainga at the moment, active ainga in our cohort. Just over 1,700 of them, just over 1,700 participants. And of those participants, they consist of our young person and also our primary caregivers, whether it's the mom, the father, or the grandparent. We Majority of our participants sit in the Auckland region, and that includes our counties Manukau, and about 67% of them reside in that counties Manukau area. We have 87 that are out of district, so that's anywhere outside of Auckland, but within New Zealand. We've got 130 overseas, and majority of that 130, as we know of today, sit in Australia, just across the ditch. And then we've got 138 in retention, which is just participants that we have no contact details for, or they've been lost to follow up. And then we also have 39 of our ainga that have a primary language that isn't English. And so what we've done, specifically for the 17 years, we've ensured that we employed language speakers within our team, which has been great for our participants being able to communicate in their chosen languages.
Awesome. So there already is a lot of data available about Pacific peoples, their families. We get it through our routine, data collection, admin data, Stats New Zealand, and so on. What do you think are some of the ways in which the Growing Up in New Zealand study differs, and what are some of the data that you have is quite unique, and differs from what we collect nationally?
Yeah, kia ora. Growing up in New Zealand is able to really give a rich insight of young people's health and well-being across time, and we also can see how some of these earlier life experiences might shape later outcomes, and what are some of the factors that contribute to well-being, and what are some of the factors that might be challenges and influencing young people's experiences. And so what is quite unique, and what we can follow across time, is Pacific young people's connectedness and relationships. For example, one really important insight we have is around culture connectedness, which is in itself an important factor, but also is a really important influence across a whole range of outcomes. And so what we can see is that Pacific young people are really strongly connected, feel really great about their ethnic identity and connection to their culture. So for example, 90% were happy with the cultural group they belong to, felt good about their cultural or ethnic background, and 80% had a lot of pride in their ethnic group. So overall, really positive experiences for young people. And here those were the example at 12 years. But we can also see how already earlier experiences shape these connections for young people. For example, we can see in the graph below the number or the percentages of Pacific parents that speak languages to their babies. And what we could see that the languages that the Pacific parents were speaking were actually also matching the languages that they were speaking to their babies. And we also could explore even further what were some of the reasons why they spoke in those non-English languages, and which mainly was because it was their strongest language, but also because they wanted their children to grow up bilingual. And we really have this rich information across time as well to explore further. Another aspect that might not really be covered in other data sets is the relationships and family life. And again, across time, for example, we see that 40% of Pacific young people lived in extended family households during those preschool years, which also had 41% had grandparents as their main caregivers. And we also see, again, shaping these strong connections and bonds that almost all mothers sang or told stories to their children and read to their babies. And we can also see these, important links and connections, relationships of young people, not just with their own parents, but also with their wider whānau, grandparents, aunties, uncles, other relatives, but also other important adults that they're connected to throughout their communities and their families. And this is something that we might not otherwise see in some of these standard data sets.
Fantastic. Thank you, Denise. So then what would you say the study can tell us about how hard it is for Pacific children growing up in New Zealand? What do you think is probably some of the key challenges for them?
Yeah, so we also see challenges that Pacific families are experiencing, particularly structural challenges and structural inequities that impact on their living conditions and their lives. So for example, if we draw on the 8-year data, we see that 1 in 4 Pacific children lived in material hardship, which means going without essentials. We also see over 40% of families sometimes or always run out of food. 66% of our Pacific families were living in high deprivation areas, which means also particularly less access to services, healthy housing, and other, more limited opportunities. And even though at age 12, 16.7% of our cohort were Pacific, they were still making up 23.5% of those living in hardship. So we definitely see some strong structural systemic inequities for Pacific families, which is also we can see in terms of food insecurity. So again, we can here draw and add to the understanding of some of these factors across time. For example, when we looked at how food security status for Pacific young people developed between 8 and 12 years of age, we could see that 27% of Pacific young people remained in food insecurity, so both at age 8 and 12. 11% moved into food insecurity out of food security from 8 to 12. About half had no change, so remained in food security. And we also saw 11% moved out of food insecurity into food security. And again, what growing up can provide that might not be, or might be adding a bit, understanding why some of these changes are happening is, for example, what we could see is that at 8 years, those households that were food insecure but received some government financial assistance were twice as likely to be food secure at 12 years compared to those who didn't receive those assistance. So it gives us a little bit more understanding what are some factors that can contribute to change some of these conditions.
Yeah, I think that's compelling evidence. It shows that it's really important that we think about the policy implications of some of this data, and it's showing that when there is good policy, good support for our families in hardship, it makes a difference. So that's great.
So here we can see, as a longitudinal study, we're able to see data going across time. And here we can see the trajectories of material hardship by ethnicity. And this is from our latest data collection wave at 15 years. So just to give a bit of a brief understanding of how we might interpret this, we have measured material hardship using the DEP17 index, which is used by Stats New Zealand. And to help us report on this, we put them into 4 different groups or clusters. And these groups are not material hardship, some exposure to hardship, persistent hardship, and increasing hardship. And as you can see on the table here, the green is not material hardship. And then as you go up the table, up to gray, you get increasing hardship. And this is broken down by ethnicity here. And so if you look at the Pacific data and with the bigger gray, dark blue, and light blue numbers, it does mean that at 15 and across time, Pacific young people or Pacific children were 7 times more likely than Sole European to face persistent hardship, 20% versus 3%. And then at 15, Māori and Pacific young people were much more likely than Sole European to face persistent or increasing hardship, with Pacific young people having the highest exposure overall. Which is obviously not something that you want to hear. And even looking at this graph, I think it's quite stark the differences there. And I just want to acknowledge that, when we're talking about things like this, and we're talking about material hardship and inability to access food and healthcare, etc., that we really should be thinking at a systems level and how this is impacted from a much more wider context than just narrowing it down to a Pacific ethnicity.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that Pacific children do grow up in hardship, but some of this data is really, again, it's quite stark. And I think it's important that we do keep this on the table, particularly when we think about some of the policy shifts that we can make. So I guess then what is the impact of some of this, perhaps, on our children's development?
So, obviously when you're experiencing hardship over time, you're in and out or it's persistent, it is going to have impacts. And, our data as a longitudinal study collects a lot of information. And some of the stuff that we have found, such as at the 18-year data collection wave, mothers were asked how often in the last 12 months had there been any time when their child needed to see a GP or a family doctor about their child's health, but didn't get to see the doctor. The proportion who answered yes to this was much higher for Māori, Asian, and Pacific, all at around the 8% mark, compared to European children who are at the 3% mark. So again, that shows that there is a difference in access to care. Other kind of health data that has come out at the 9-month data collection wave, 85% of Pacific mothers indicated that they were currently breastfeeding or had been breastfeeding their babies, which is actually higher than the average we had in our cohort, which was 81%. And again, at the before school check, it showed that 17% of Pacific children had hearing concerns that were raised at the before school check. So obviously that means that, at that age, they can start to think about interventions and, other support that might be needed at that time. So yeah, we do have a lot of different data coming out, but we'll lead on to education.
Yeah, kia ora. And yeah, similarly to what Rebecca said, we also see these impacts of material hardship here and a range of other outcomes related to education. But we also see some positive findings. So if we are looking here at the experiences of education and schooling, looking at the early childhood education, we saw that 87% of Pacific children attended a center-based early childhood education, and 85% of mothers were really satisfied with the school, how their schools responded to their child's cultural needs at age 6. And this kind of was a pattern we saw across time. So there was a really high satisfaction. Also how the school impacted on music or singing of Pacific children. The mothers were also satisfied how the school responded to all their child needs at age 8. And at age 12, the Pacific young people had among the highest school engagement scores that we could see in our cohort. Unfortunately, there's also challenges at school. So bullying experiences that young people have to face. But what we could also see on the flip side, Pacific young people were the ones who most helped out other young people who were experiencing bullying. And here's some of our more recent 15-year data, asking young people's aspirations within the formal school or education setting. And we could see that, and also preparedness around their last school years or at age 15. And we saw about half of the Pacific young people reported they felt well or quite well prepared, while 43% felt somewhat prepared, and 13% thought they were not really well or at all prepared. When we asked them how far in school they were think to go, so around their aspirations, 35% said university, 23% were interested in finishing secondary school, 70% thought finishing school, but then didn't think about further training or study. And then 6% were considering to leave beforehand, and about 11% were unsure at the time. So many 15-year-olds were aspiring to continue And while there were some positives, also challenges experienced at school. And here we also see satisfaction with school at 15 years. If we start with the caregiver school satisfaction graph at the left-hand side, so the score ranges from 1 to 5, and as you can see, the overall across all ethnic groups, it is a relatively high school satisfaction that the caregivers reported, but Pacific, again, were among the highest. So this is the common theme across time. However, what we also could see, and going back to our material hardship earlier findings, is that particularly these experiences were patterned by long-term material hardship. So compared to no hardship, there was less caregiver school satisfaction when the families were experiencing exposure to hardship, which obviously reflects these added challenges that the families have to juggle, and which obviously schools might not able to buffer and need to be addressed on a more system level. And on the right-hand side, we see young people school satisfaction at 15 years, so pretty much whether they like school. And what we could see as well, that common theme that Pacific young people had among the highest school satisfaction, which is the green side of the bar. And as you can see in the second bar, Pacific young people had among the highest school satisfaction. What we could also see that this was strongly patterned by cultural connectedness. So the stronger the young people felt connected to their culture, the higher their school satisfaction. And on the flip side, young people had experienced any form of discrimination, and sadly, many of these young people experienced discrimination at school. That would then in turn lead to a lower school satisfaction.
Awesome. And again, I think it just reinforces that, the Pacific children are growing up in such stark conditions, some quite serious challenges, and yet at the same time, there is still a lot of positive outcomes just in the way that they kind of think about school, and the school being a bit of a resilience factor for them as well. And so it's really important that we think about ways of increasing income, material hardship, and so on. There's so many different settings, including school, that can be quite protective for our young people. And so it's equally important that we invest in them as well. And it's great to see that cultural connectedness, again, seems to be one of those protective factors. That is not just seems, is definitely one of those important protective factors that we want to support. And I know that mental health comes into play here. We've seen bullying. There's been some quite significant, mental health findings over the years, and some of them have sort of shifted as well. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yes, I will talk about that. But before we proceed, I just wanted to highlight that we will be talking about young people's mental health and well-being, including depression and anxiety. So, if this might not be the right time for you to be listening, now might be a time for you to take a break. Or if you go away at a later time and you think that you need someone to talk to, then we have the free text or call 1737 up on screen. And also, if you go to the Growing Up in New Zealand website, we also do have tools and services available there, should you need these if you, feel that you're struggling with any of the issues. So mental health. This is looking at our 12-year data, broken down by ethnicity. The first column on the left, I think you'll be seeing the left too, depression. This is showing that at 12 years, the mean depression symptom scores for Pacific young people was 8.57, which was the highest out of all our ethnic groups. And then if we go along to the other side, which is the anxiety table, at 12 years, the average anxiety symptom score for Pacific young people was 45.94, and that's in a range of 33 up to 83. And this also was the highest amongst all of our ethnic groups at age 12. And then, so that was from our 12-year data collection wave. And now we're going to move forward to our 15-year data collection wave. But I think one of the most important findings that came out of this report was that most young people are doing well, and that includes everyone across all of our ethnic groups. A lot of them were really, really positive about their peer relationships. 84% reported having good friends and 79% reported trusting their friends. And this graph down the bottom just shows how some of these statements they have said that were almost always true or often true or sometimes true, such as I trust my friends and my friends listen to what I say. So at 15, a lot of young people are having a really good positive peer relationships. So we looked at the 12-year data on anxiety and depression, and now if we come forward to the 15-year data collection wave, where we measured anxiety and depression, on the left you will see the anxiety scores broken down by ethnicity, and at 15 years old, Pacific young people reported the lowest levels of anxiety. And then again, if you go to the right-hand side and we look at depression, you'll see that again, at 15 years, Pacific young people reported the lowest levels of depression. So those are, like you said, Jacinta, there's some really interesting findings going from 12 to 15 and having these different outcomes, and not just a little movement, but yeah, quite a big move.
Have there been any initial thoughts as to why Pacific young people at the age of 15 now have improved mental health from when they were 12?
Yeah, there are a lot of thoughts that goes back to my weekly thinking and thinking. I think it's important for when we're looking at 12 versus 15, if we're thinking contextually with 12 year, it happened just after COVID. And a lot of Pacific young people were impacted quite disproportionately over COVID and, on the back of COVID and, ongoing. So that could be a contextual factor that's coming into play, and maybe it's improved over time. It could be because it could be any number of things, but I do think it's important when we're looking at overall the different times of what was going on at the time when these data collection waves happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And so then I guess, we've seen quite a bit of data, and I do want to open it up for any questions and comments from the participants. Jackie will probably flick through any questions that come through. But just while we're waiting on that, what do you think then should be some of the things we should advocate for? What are some of the things we should, kind of think about shifting, changing, either in practice or policy?
Yeah, if we maybe start with our education findings, particularly drawing on the more recent 15-year data. So what we could see that definitely support should be quite tailored to the needs of each learner, rather than just having a one-size-fits-all approach, acknowledging the diverse experiences that young people are having. We also saw quite clearly that the young people's schooling experience is not just isolated, and it's not just an individual experiences, but it's embedded in much wider contexts, and whether they're experiences of connectedness within the school setting, maybe even outside the school setting, but also these structural factors shape the experiences of young people within the education system. So that definitely should be something that is kept in mind and looked after, and ensuring that these young people can flourish in their education experiences within these broader systems as well.
Yeah, so, and then if we move across to our mental health and well-being policy implications, we acknowledge, as we've spoken about across this webinar, that persistent inequities in mental health outcomes remain a priority for action. We need more tailored and culturally responsive and culturally safe services that tackle these structural barriers and promote equity within the health system, including mental health with access and just making sure that the systems are tailored in ways that responds to the unique needs of young people, Pacific young people, and not, broken down into our Samoa and our Tonga, like just making sure that everything is responding in a way that young people are able to feel that they are safe and that they are cared for. We also recognise that these supportive factors, they need to be reinforced. Like Denise said, these educational settings, they shape our well-being. So if we're seeing that there are these positive things that are coming out through our data, how do we keep improving these? How do we keep making sure that young people experience positive friendships, that they experience cultural connectedness? So we're talking about factors that we can identify that have promoted well-being. How do we keep doing this? How do we keep reproducing these kind of environments that have supported young people to a point, and how do we keep moving forward, not just for the young person, but for their family as well. And then for mental health and well-being, we need to look at the social determinants and human rights-based approaches matter. So we acknowledge that a lot of our outcomes are shaped by the social, cultural, and economic factors. And as Denise mentioned, discrimination was strongly linked to poor outcomes, including poor mental health. This kind of needs coordinated decision making across every tier. Like, I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all, but I think if we approach it from a human rights based approach, if we think people have the right to good healthcare, to good health, then we can start thinking about ways that we can put that into action. Support our young people's well-being, as well as acknowledging them as humans with their own rights, and make adjustments accordingly across policy and across every decision-making tier that we can speak to.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't think anyone can argue with any of these. These are great start. It's a great start, and I'm pretty sure all of our participants too might have some ideas on what are some of the things we could, target. What are some of the things that we could really focus on, particularly in the coming year, thinking about all of the stuff that's happening in our country right now. What are some of the things we should elevate, particularly some of those protective factors? We think about connectedness. That's such a great finding, and such an important protective factor. How can we leverage that? So please feel free to, don't be shy. You can put your question in or comment, or idea. Feel free to pop that in the chat. But we've invited Dame Tuila Percival to be with us to provide us with perhaps just some commentary. What are your thoughts, Tuila, just on what you've seen on the data, and thinking about your role on the front line, what some of the implications are, or even some of your thoughts on where we should focus our efforts as a society?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Great questions are coming
it's
through.
just, when I think about Pacific children, it's everything is so big. There's so much to do. But I guess a lot of your findings are not unsurprising. So we know that our kids are persistently in more material hardship than other kids, and the sequelae of that is poorer health, poorer issues with education. You look at our young people who are in secondary school and having part-time jobs to support their families. So we know all this happens. We've got more rates of pneumonia and rheumatic fever, and it's quite disheartening, I suppose, that this continues. And to be honest, who listens to what are the needs of our children? And I think who listens is us. So for me, the really important thing is that we can talk about policy that we need to change in systems, but we've been talking about that for some time. So we do have to sometimes focus on what we can do. And, those wonderful connections you showed, which will set our children onto a positive trajectory and resilience, no matter the hardships. So those cultural connections, the connections with siblings and peers in school, grandparents in the home, all those are things that we can do. We can do it ourselves. So, focusing on our families, so our grandparents are still around our kids. Our siblings are all around everybody. We support our kids to hear the stories of home and our culture. They grow up with the literacies of our island homes, so they understand who they are and where they're from. All of that's going to help keep our children on that positive trajectory to well-being and resilience. So while we're still trying to push to try and get better system responsiveness for our, a living wage, more support for our young people going into tertiary education, better housing, while we're just still trying to push all of those things, which are absolutely really critical, we can work on what we ourselves can lead in our community. What is it we can do? It's lovely to hear the positive things you say about our kids as well, because that's really important. And I really like the way you capture things like mothers singing and telling stories to their babies, and I hope you capture how many fathers do as well, because that's really important too. We need to make sure we don't forget the role that our dads and our grandfathers have in our children's lives. So I look forward to hearing more about fathers and what they're doing in kids' lives. But yes, so it's really nice, and I think one of the great things your study is going to hopefully tell us is that in 15, 20 years' time, when these kids are adults having their own children, we're going to see what were the key things that happened in their early lives that have set them to a trajectory of a positive trajectory. And for us Pacific, that might not be a lawyer or a doctor. It might be that they're happy, that they take care of their families, that they're in a work or a job in which they feel validated and useful. So it'd be really nice to see in those years ahead what it is that was so important in children that you've collected. So I hope the study keeps going. It's going to be really hard as you go on. You're going to have to get more money, I think. But it's a great study. So yes, congratulations. Keep going.
Pearls of wisdom, as always. Thank you, Dame Tuila. And I love that you've balanced it out. Like, I think there's a lot of things that we can advocate for in policy, but there are some things that our families have been doing, our values, all those crucial things that, our grandparents have been doing, even just the singing to our babies. They call it, serve and return. There's a whole lot of clinical evidence around the importance of that and growing babies' brains. That's something we've been doing all the time. We just need to keep going and maintain those cultural practices. So thank you for that. We have got a question, and thank you for Pulia Imaji, Apa. Thank you for joining us. A great question. Any insights on groups other than school and family, e.g. churches, as a protective factor?
So we did have captured quite a bit of information around faith and spirituality, and also connectedness to churches and etc. So we particularly hadn't looked at it as part of this reporting, but we definitely have information around that could be explored further. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and this was really just a few snapshots into a couple of outcomes that are part of growing up, but there's definitely a lot more opportunities to explore this in more depth, particularly, what is relevant from Pacific perspective around some of the, maybe from a more holistic perspective than some of these typical health outcomes. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more opportunity and potential to look at. Yeah.
And certainly with some of the work, some of the research I did with the Growing Up in New Zealand study, particularly at the 8-year data collection wave, Pacific children definitely had the highest rates of being affiliated with a church or a religious group. And then when we interviewed some of these children for a qualitative piece, and for those children who did attend church, there was certainly a lot of positive relationships, positive connections that they had gained through that. But what was very interesting was that some of these children connected through church, not just through their parents. Sometimes it was through their grandparents who continued the tradition, who was more their spiritual keeper rather than the parents themselves, who may have come to it at a later stage. So that's just some of the emerging findings. But there is a lot of richness in there and data that's available there for further analysis. Great, thank you. And so I think, there's another question here. Thank you for the shared information. It's good to see that a higher number of mothers breastfeed their babies up to 9 months. For the hearing concerns, what are the cause of the issues? Are there any thoughts around, the rates of, of the hearing checks, but also some of those higher rates of ear infections?
I can probably answer that.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks, Tawila.
I mean, our children tend to have lots of upper respiratory tract infections, so they develop more serous otitis media, so glue ear, and present late often with those conditions. So it was what was found in the AUT study as well. So hearing problems, serous otitis media, much more common in our kids, which is why that before school check where they have the hearing and vision testers seeing kids hopefully when they're 4 is so important, because we need to pick kids up before they start school if they've got hearing problems.
Thank you for the question, Bessie. And there's another question around, do we know what factors drive the reduction in anxiety and depression scores from aged 12 to 15? And so you did touch on that, Rebecca. You thought that perhaps specific children were more impacted following COVID, hence the high rates of anxiety and depression. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, and I wish I had more insights into that. I wish that I could provide more context there, but at this stage, it would only be talking about what happened at 12 versus 15. Yeah, do they still wanna?
Yeah, and also just to mention that we didn't particularly look at the trajectory just for Pacific families as well, and the same people between 12 and 15, so that might have to be zoomed in as well, because there's obviously slightly different people that we had at 12 versus 15, and in order to really say if it's an actual change, we would need to trace the same people across time and really zoom in particular on our Pacific families. So again, it's that potential that the studies still have to dive in deeper. Maybe also to add is that obviously, and some of the data was actually also from 8 years, as early as 8 years. So we need to be mindful also that there's different developmental stages that we have. So even though we have the same measures, obviously what some of these questions mean to an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, that the interpretation as well might be slightly different to 15-year. So we just, again, keeping it within a context from a range of factors, but definitely potential to look at in more depth.
And while we're on the data, on the topic of anxiety and depression, were you able to break this down by Pacific ethnicities? Samoan, Tongan, Cook Islands?
So we kept it, so our main reporting is by level 1 ethnicity. So that's another obviously potential to really dive in deeper into acknowledging the diversity of Pacific ethnicities rather than just looking at that really broad level. So that's definitely something that could be explored in much more depth as well.
Okay, then we have a question from Dana. This is such rich data that really highlights key areas of need and support for our people. But they want to know more about policy and systems change in the 15 years of the Growing Up in New Zealand study. What policies have been influenced and strengthened or put in place from the study during this, the duration of it?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I think some of the biggest impacts that we've had throughout the years would be our findings that there was an overwhelming desire for our mothers to have longer paid parental leave. So through our data, we were able to show that. So we were able to increase the parental leave from 14 weeks to 26 weeks. We also found that an overwhelming amount of mothers weren't getting the necessary amounts of folic acid during pregnancy, which can be such an important, you need that when you're pregnant to prevent a number of health issues possibly occurring. And so this led to folic acid being put into our flour, into our bread. We also found out that only 25% of rental homes had smoke alarms. So Smoke alarms being made mandatory was another one of our findings. Or sorry, one of the ways that we were able to directly influence and speak to policy. So those are some of the ways, which I think are pretty cool.
Awesome. It's a great question.
Mm.
Thank you. And again, I think there's still lots of different areas that we can delve into that, if people have ideas, please feel free to connect in with the team. Denise and Rebecca and Savelia, I'm pretty sure will be more than happy to share their details after this. And the team do a lot of great work. But again, I think the advocacy also comes from a groundswell of, people really interested in a topic or really wanting to make the change, just all of us working together to do that. I think just as we're waiting for any further questions, I will hand the time over now to Savili because we are currently going through the 17-year data collection wave. So these young people, I believe, are now going to be 17. And so there's, another chance there for us to really get more of our Pacific families back on board, to give us that information, to look at what they're like now as almost adults. Did you want to talk about that, Savili?
Yeah, for sure. So heading into that 17-year data collection that we currently have, we had three main focuses in the 15-year, and the first one was right method of engagement. We needed to factor in that our kids are now 17 and they're of age to consent for themselves, so we are allowed with the consent of the child and the PC to connect with them directly. So those are one of the things, that's one thing that we needed to factor in when we were thinking about the right method of engagement. But business as usual methods of engagement included phone calls, emails and SMS, as well as home visiting those who weren't necessarily connecting with us, and we were calling them or emailing them. And so what we found was we created a customer journey that was phone call heavy, but realized later on in the 15-year that we were actually more successful in the home visits. So then home visits then became our main method of engagement in the 15-year, and it's also now one of the pivotal ways that we engage with our families in the 17-year at this very point in time. We're only 6 weeks in at the moment, and so we've seen quite good engagement compared to the 15-year at the 6-week mark. So it's been pretty good. And we looked at also doing a bit of restoration work. So when data collection finished for the 15-year, our team then went into restoration mode, which basically was just trying to restore those relationships with those who we had no contact details for. And what that looked like was a lot of home visits, a lot of door knocking, a lot of contacting our participant alternate contacts that they had listed, and also just their GPs if they had them listed as well. And so that was actually really successful because we've seen in the 17-year data collection so far, we've been able to get across a few oranges. No, not oranges, you won't understand that. A few of our participants with no contact details we've been able to engage with after doing that restoration work. And it's been amazing. It's worked its magic for what it's supposed to do. And then the last thing that we also focused in the 15-year was rebuilding those relationships with the ainga that we just weren't able to engage with, or they were overseas and they just didn't feel like this study was, they didn't have any value to contribute to the study no longer. And so what we did was just, putting aside the study, but making sure that we're connecting with them Pacific to Pacific. And so we got our language speakers out there. We got people in Australia also home visiting in Australia in the 15-year. And yeah, so that's basically what we did in the 15-year, and it's proving to be amazing so far for the 17-year.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Savili. And again, if you know of anyone who is involved in the Growing Up in New Zealand study, a family,
Yes,
please do
please.
encourage them to look out for the email that's coming through, fill out the survey because it really does help us hone in on some of this very rich, nuanced data and information that we really need.